Hi, my name is Renee Hobbs, and welcome to The Virus of Racism, Part 3. Ever since the tragic murders of George Floyd, Breonna, we've been, as a community, sort of discussing what our responsibilities are to address the racism that is present in our law enforcement, in our education systems, and in our society. And I am so glad that you have joined us for today's conversation. I am absolutely thrilled to share with you a colleague I've known for a long time, it feels like, Janine, but maybe, I don't know, it can't be more than 10 years, right? Might be, but Janine Staples is here as our special guest presenter. And before we let her take us on a journey, we are really thinking about where we've been. We are honoring Janine's unique expertise today as a scholar and an educator, as a life coach, as a person who's thinking deeply about integrating the head, the heart, and the spirit. And we're doing that even here in our time together with the pizza wheel of emotion. Now, you may think it's silly that we're going to reflect on the pizza pillow of emotion, but let's use it as a check-in device. Many of you participated in virtually viral hangouts during the coronavirus pandemic in March, in April, in May, and June. And you know how important it is for us to acknowledge our feelings and emotions in this complex place where we are. So please take a minute and use the annotation tools of Zoom. You can roll your cursor up to the top there, click on the link that says annotate, and then you can draw or stamp the emotion that best fits where you are at today. I'm feeling a little unsafe, so I'm putting some hearts next to my unsafe word. I did just receive news that I was exposed to COVID yesterday. And so I've gotten a little bit more scared. A little bit more. My pizza slice is scared today. Where are you on the pizza wheel of emotions, and who wants to explain why you're there? I'd like to hear from 5 people. Who's going to share? Just unmute your microphone and tell me why you picked the slice of pepperoni that you chose.
I'm curious to learn what Janine will tell us about this very important topic, which is a very important topic in Germany too. So I'm excited to learn, and I'm curious what I can learn about this wonderful, no, it's not a wonderful topic, it's a difficult topic from this wonderful researcher.
We're glad you're here, Silke. Thank you for joining us from Germany, and thank you for being curious. Who's next?
Hi. Go ahead, please.
This is Kate from Chicago, and I picked gentle because I think we so need self-compassion as well as compassion in our ordinary moments every day.
Beautifully put. Thank you for sharing. Who's next?
Hi, this is George. I am also from Chicago. I am choosing excited because tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I am going to be with a group of social workers from Birmingham in UK, and about 10 of them from Birmingham and another 10 or more people from Hamburg, Germany, discussing the impact of COVID on human services, the social work practices. Our discussion today, is very timely. So I am very excited to be part of this.
George, we've always been appreciative of your bridge building identity that connects us to people around the country and around the world and across different fields as well. So thank you for joining us today. Ava, I see in the chat, my quiet and shy Ava. Ava, I see that you asked if you could circle more than one pizza wheel. Can you tell me which ones are most relevant for you at this particular moment?
Well, I wanted to circle the whole pizza.
Say more about that.
Well, I'm a Gemini, so I think that's fair. I'm feeling all of these things. Personally, I'm happy and I'm calm and I'm excited for things and in the work that I'm doing and the life that I'm living. But then when I look externally at what other people are doing that impacts us all, I get disgusted and nervous. I'm just like shocked at the animus towards doing simple things that would help the common good or the collective good. And so I'm just kind of a mix of things. If I look inwardly, I'm fine. If I look outwardly, not so much.
That was powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. Who else would like to share? I'll hear from two more of you. Where are you on the pizza wheel of emotion right now at this moment?
This is Shauna from Philadelphia. Greetings, everyone. I am glad to be here. I'm going to have to leave a little bit early to go teach. My apologies for the quick exit I'll make in a little bit. I'm on the hope pizza slice, decidedly, because although I can relate to probably everything else on here, forums like this give me hope. The increased conversations about these kinds of topics give me so much hope. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much for being part of it. I'll hear from one last person before we move on to meet Janine and hear about her thoughts on this complicated topic.
Hi, this is Robin.
Hi, Robin.
I'm in Boone, North Carolina, and I will also have to leave at 1:30, just so you know, for class. But I circled love because tomorrow is my 25th wedding anniversary. So I've been putting together a little bit of love for that event tomorrow and feeling loved. So yeah, so that's good. And the sun is shining here.
Sweet. What a great reason to feel love. The sun is shining and you are happily married, and that is fantastic. We're glad that 42 of you have arrived here for our dialogue with Janine. And I think most of you are here because you read her distinguished biography on the Media Education Lab website. And Janine, I think you have a cool set of provocations to share with us today. So take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Renee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak before you. I really enjoy these conversations. I would like to start off by telling you a little bit about my background and the scholarship that actually brought me to some of my conclusions that I stand on today and that I operate from. One thing I would ask is that if it's possible, would you turn your video on? I know that that's a little bit controversial in Zoom life because we suffer from Zoom fatigue and we might be double tasking or triple tasking, but I really find that when a person's Zoom video is on, we can connect better energetically just as a community. So if you're available to do that, I'd appreciate that very much. The other thing I'd like to do is just to learn a little bit more about you before I go into my spiel. What I'd love for you to do is, if you are a professor, would you put a 1 in the chat? And if you are an administrator or a person who does some other work in a university setting, would you put a 2 in the chat? And if you're a student, I'd love for you to put a 3 in the chat. Graduate student, undergraduate student, that would be really helpful. And if I haven't called out your category, if you're not a faculty or an instructor or an administrator or a manager or a student, place a 4 in the chat. That means that you are occupying another space. Okay, and I'd like to know what that space is. So Heidi or Rachel or Charles or Amy, if you could say what it is you do. Okay, K-12 curriculum, faith-based media literacy workshops. Got it. Okay, good. Training and consulting, journalist, filmmaker, 6-8 librarian. That's wonderful. Okay. Very helpful, and I am so glad that I asked, because I get to share with you a little bit of tidbits that I may not have shared otherwise if I didn't know exactly who you are and where you're operating from. So a little bit about me. I am a professor at Penn State. I'm a professor of literacy and language, African American studies, and women's gender and sexuality studies. I have a triple affiliation through the College of Education and the College of Liberal Arts, so I'm super busy. I'm also the founder of the Supreme Love Project. So the Supreme Love Project is an emotional justice initiative that I founded. And also, if you don't mind muting your device so that we don't have any noise on the background recording. Thank you so much, Charles. So the Supreme Love Project is an emotional justice initiative that I founded 5 years ago in order to make my research and scholarship accessible to everyday women. I was feeling really concerned that what I was discovering in my university life and as a scholar, I'm an educational anthropologist, wasn't making it out to mainstream in any feasible, reasonable way that I could feel really excited about and proud of. And so I founded the Supreme Love Project, and since then I've been balancing both worlds. I feel really good about the way I'm balancing them, and it's really fed into my scholarship in a really powerful way. So because I do race and gender theory, and I think about curriculum a lot, I'm a secondary English teacher in my former life before I became a professor. So I know what it's like to teach teens. I've been a teacher educator for quite a long time. And, oh, hey, Wendy. Good, twinsies. So that's my background, that's my perspective. And as you can see, or maybe you might not assume, but I am Black. I am a Black woman. I claim African American status. And I think about race and gender a lot, not only as a scholar, but also from my lived experience as a Black woman in the United States of America. So there are two realms of research that I'd like to talk to you about, and then I'd like to lean into one in particular. So I am a teacher educator, meaning that I work with pre-service teachers, really at the beginning of the career, to think about, and this is K-12 teachers, also counselors, therapists, librarians have taken my classes as well, to think about how full personhood is understood by practitioners or administrators or managers in K-12 contexts, and also to really understand how our understanding of personhood, race, gender, ability, culture, language, actually informs the fullness of personhood. And what I found over the years, especially pre the founding of the Supreme Law Project, was that because most of the pre-service educators and even administrators in the field of K-12 education are white women, there was a real breach in understanding around the complexities of personhood. And I found that some of the breach of understanding around the complexity of personhood really fell into the realm of a lack of understanding of race. There was no racial literacy. There was very little literacies around gender injury or racial injury that actually could inform one's ability to conceive of wholeness, humanity in a very holistic framework, instead of just a white male binary, a sort of flat linear lens through which to understand everyone. This is too narrow a prism. So as a teacher educator, I thought to myself, what are the ways that I could actually create curriculum that I offer at the university through my courses to open up conceptions of personhood among these groups of folks who are so integral to the life trajectory of students, mainly who are of color, Black, Indigenous, multiracial, multi-ethnic students are increasingly represented among our K-12 populations, and yet our teacher workforce, as you all know, is overwhelmingly still white. And so the disconnect between those two audiences is actually lethal. And I say that with all due sincerity, And it's lethal because the people who are in charge of instructional delivery, in charge of curriculum design, in charge of cultural norms and values, in charge of praxis and pedagogical frames, are not connected deeply and sincerely to the communities of that they're interfacing with, and the children that they're responsible for inspiring, responsible for connecting with. And that brief it can be life-threatening. And so, in a twist of fate, I began writing my book, The Revelations of Asher, in 2012. And it was 10 years in the making. Well, at that point, it was less than that. I started the book in graduate school. And essentially, it's a collection of what I call terror narratives. Now, as y'all know, I am a teacher, just like you. So I hope that you take notes and you write down terms that I offer so that I can define them for you later and expound upon them. So I work with a group of women in the city of Philadelphia while I was in graduate school and shortly thereafter to collect terror narratives. So terror narratives, if you want to write this down, I think it's important to know, is simply a written or verbal articulation of experiences with violence. That's a terror narrative. And I define them as little t and big T. So a little t terror narrative really captures a lot of microaggressions. The sort of small, nuanced, almost imperceptible aggressions and insults and injuries that many people of color, particularly Black people, are subject to in schools and society. Big T terror narratives are really concerned with macroaggressions. So a macroaggression really deals with the body. So a macroaggression is an assault on person. It could be physical assault, rape, police brutality. The difference between a microaggression and a macroaggression, a little t terror and a big T terror narrative, is that you can file a police report about a big T. So the state recognizes big T terror narratives because they are witnessed, because they are physical, because they are material, they involve property, they involve the body, for example. So over the course of time, long story short, I collected about 4,000, nearly 4,000 terror narratives from Black and brown women and white women in the United States and abroad, both before and after my founding of the Supreme Love Project. And in mining the data, doing really empowered critical discourse analysis and dark and feminist analysis, doing a crosswalk around data sets, I discovered that terror narratives, if presented by Black girls and women in particular, who dealt with so many different terrors in schools, so many different terrors in society, are mined closely, over time, they can give way to a triumph narrative. A triumph narrative. Now, I also name those as little t, big T. So a little t triumph narrative I define as a verbal or written articulation of a succeeding or a valiant or a victorious energy over sort of the effects of a microaggressive set of attacks that one might experience from a teacher or a counselor or an administrator or a parent, a family member, someone in the neighborhood. A big T triumph narrative is a verbal or written account of one's experience of overcoming something really huge in relation to a physical assault, an attack on body autonomy, for example. So when I started to segment the data and do like a really deep dive and do some analysis around triumph narratives, how did they come to be? Asking myself, how do girls in school, Black girls and brown girls in particular, and Black girls and brown women in particular, how do they encounter such constant terrors and still craft triumphs? How does that actually happen? What is the process of that? The reason I wanted to understand how the process of moving from terror to triumph actually happened from a narrative perspective, from a literacy-based perspective, is because I realized that if I could figure out the ways of the trajectory of healing and self-sustaining that I could communicate with white pre-service teachers more effectively, more profoundly. Not only to communicate the inherent worth, value, deservedness, honor, and power of Black and brown girls and women in schools and society, but also I could communicate what would be required of them as white people dealing with social, cultural, and political stories of breakdown in relationships between schools and society. What would be required of them as white people, namely white women, to actually move through conversations around racism, around sexism, around misogyny, around ableism, around all manner of phobia with any level of even proficiency, let alone expertise. And the reason that was so important is because if any of you know or understand what teacher education is like, in communities where there are mainly white pre-service teachers, you know there's an incredible amount of fragility. There's a great deal of breakdown in conversations about race and racism. Some of it is developmental because many of the white pre-service teachers who are being trained to go into urban, rural, and suburban contexts today are very young. And sometimes a 21 or 22-year-old person does not have exposure or experience to these complex conversations about racism, about white supremacy, about patriarchy, around ideology. And so they do not have the aptitude, the skill set to manage energies and emotions that come up in relation to those conversations. And if you do know that, you also know it's a great impediment to the work of teacher education. When one, as a teacher educator, is required to spend a great deal of time assuaging hard feelings, pacifying breakdowns, negotiating these emotional and energetic conflicts, we're actually not necessarily getting to the work of developing pedagogical frames that are innovative, that are ruled by a justice framework, that are really anchored by strength and power. So when I discovered the pathway from terror to triumph among Black and brown girls and women in schools and society, I thought, eureka. I've learned from some of the most egregiously abused members of our society how it is they stand with such grace, with such power, with such rigor, with such strength in the midst of a white supremacist patriarchal ideological frame that's fairly constant in their lives, whether they are a student or whether they're in the workforce. Because I've learned from these girls and women what actually happens in their interior life through my review of their narratives again and again and again. I have actually empowered myself as a teacher educator to grasp a framework and a model for personhood that can actually, in some ways, be transferred and communicated to white educators everywhere. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is that. And I know that I probably have like 5 minutes left. And I know, Renee, you'll help me with time because I do want to take your questions. But what I'd like to do now is just to pare down basically the 5 components of a really powerful interior life that I've discovered through my research with Black and brown girls and women in schools and society. These 5 aspects of interior life are, in effect, I truly believe, for any human. And the ways that these 5 aspects of interiority are riled or intoxicated by a constant exposure to white supremacist patriarchal ideology is a part of the problem that we get to solve as educators, as scholars, and as activists. And so in reviewing these multiple thousands of terror narratives with Black and brown girls and women, and also white women in schools and society, I found these 5 phenomena, and I encourage you to write them down. So the first, when people are constantly accosted by a white supremacist patriarchal ideology in their curriculum, in relationships, in instructional design, in the layout of the culture of their classroom, their learning environment, in their personal, romantic, professional relationships. 5 breakdowns happen. They develop defense mechanisms. So that's the first structure in interiority that arises. And defense mechanisms are all about blocking and forming resistances to attack. And that can manifest as, really anywhere from a binary of aggression to complete shutdown. Defense mechanisms. The second is a really complex narrative structure. So the narrative structure can be really complicated by negativity, caution, profanity, again, defense, self-deprecation, the language of low self-esteem, for example. The third phenomena that I found in interiority that gets really, really intoxicated and riled from constant exposure to white supremacist patriarchal ideology are negating belief systems, whereby one has a limit on their ability to imagine multiple futures in which they are free, in which they are valued, in which they are safe. The fourth is the heightening of survival programs. So when a Black girl or woman in schools and society is constantly exposed to a white supremacist patriarchal ideology, constantly exposed to vilification, constantly exposed as like the embodiment of a stereotype threat, she also elevates her survival programs. So your survival program is where adrenal fatigue kicks in because the person is constantly feeling and sensitizing danger. And it could be emotional danger, danger of exposure, danger of rejection, danger of abandonment. It's not only always physical danger, it's often emotive. And then the fifth frame that I found in interiority that actually gets turned on is somatic pain. So the finding is around how Black and brown girls and women in schools and society developed physical pain, physical manifestations of pain. We're talking about headaches, heart palpitations, throat seasons and closures, knots in the belly, body aches. It's all a sign of stress. It's all a sign of anxiety. It's all a layover of the culmination of this hypervigilance that one develops when they are constantly the object, again, of white supremacist patriarchal ideology from their teachers, from their administrators, from their counselors, from media, from curriculum, where a girl or woman feels that they are invisibilized, shrunken, made smaller, and denoted as weak, or subservient, or some other sort of stereotype. So if defense mechanisms are heightened, if narrative structures are intoxicated, if belief systems are nil and flat and shallow, if survival programs are turned on, and if somatic pain is heightened, what you end up having is a person who's traumatized. That's what you have. You have a person who's traumatized. Now, the story doesn't end there. What I discovered in my data is that it is true. Black and brown girls and women in schools and society, at least the ones from my data, and again, I spoke to many thousands, actually can develop this cluster of fracturing in their interior life. And yet, so many Black and brown girls and women in schools and society actually counter and supersede that clustering of aspects in interiority and do healing for themselves and in communities where there are affinities of practice to actually develop an interior life that not only can meet those defense mechanisms, those negative narrative structures, those complex belief systems, the survival programs, and the somatic strength with a pause. But these girls and women that I've worked with and that I've studied have actually developed something that I call extraordinary literacies. Sets of social practices and spiritual practices that actually forge a level of strength, stamina, and capacity that empowers them to not only survive toxic school and social environments, but actually thrive inside of them despite those environments. The incredible finding will be outlined in my forthcoming book, and that's not a plug, but I am writing this up in my book titled Extraordinary Pedagogies with Teachers College Press right now. And another book, Extraordinary Literacies, will be particularly on those literacy practices. And the discovery is that what's required of white people in general, and white pre-service teachers and in-service teachers in particular, what is required to actually participate actively and intentionally in deeply empowered conversations and calls to action, social justice and emotional justice action, on behalf of the most disenfranchised and vulnerable members of classrooms and of social spaces, and to advocate for themselves to evolve, is for the average white woman in particular to develop even a fraction of the interior constitution of the average Black girl. That's what's required. To meet fragility with a type of strength and stamina and capacity to manage emotions that arise with racial injury, gender injury, and all manner of phobia, with grace, with wisdom, with consistency over time. So that's my spiel. I'm super excited to introduce the concepts to you. I would love to have a conversation with you about it and answer questions. I think that was my 15 minutes.
Wow, that was absolutely wonderful. And you have given us a whole bunch of things to talk about. Here's how we're going to proceed. We're going to work in some small groups. Janine, you're going to join a small group and engage in a small group dialogue. We'd like to open the small group discussion for you and the people you're with. Make sure you meet each other, introduce yourselves, of course. Maybe you'll want to talk about how you've encountered terror narratives, or how you've encountered or crafted triumph narratives. Maybe you'll want to reflect on what social and spiritual practices support that strength, stamina, and capacity for dealing with racial injury, which is a key idea here. And then I do think it's really interesting for us to reflect on those 5 features of interior life that Janine, that you've introduced to us. So this is about a 12-minute conversation. When we come back, we'll have some Q&A with Janine and some synthesis about what ideas emerge in your conversation. Give me a thumbs up if you understand the idea that you're going to be introducing yourselves to a group of people who are interested in this topic, and that you're going to be exploring the questions and the concepts that Janine has raised. I see lots of thumbs up in the room. Breakout rooms are being created. If there's nobody in your breakout room, just do me a favor, come back into the main room, okay? All right, we'll have about 12 minutes of small group dialogue about the issues that Janine has introduced to us today. Have fun. Okay, you are coming back. I just love this part of the Zoom meeting. When people come back into the room, that's the funnest thing for me to watch. Why is that so pleasing? I can't explain why I love it so much. Okay, we have only about 7 minutes, and we'll hear from anybody who wants to make an observation or synthesize or ask Janine a question. Topics came up in your room that were provocative and interesting and poignant and maybe even enlightening, I'm sure. Who wants to share?
I'll go first. I wanted to say I was sort of cut off right at the end of the group. I was saying one thing that I think is important for everyone, and it's that someone asked me, like, where do I get my strength, my stamina, and my capacity? Like, how do I increase my strength, my stamina, and my capacity? Because I actually don't feel stressed right now. I know the world is pretty stressed and scared right now. I don't feel those things. And I think that it's important for me to say that my strength, my stamina, my capacity has actually been engendered by and edified by my spiritual grounding, my spiritual principles. I will be writing in my book about something called imperial logics, which are spiritual principles that are really incredibly enlightening and edifying and inspiring when digested over and over and over again to apply to the space of personhood, to the space of meaning making or memory making in the human experience. And so I was saying, Renee, in my group that to think about racial literacy, to think about social and emotional justice, I believe that the next phase of our thought structures and our calls to action will necessarily include a spiritual component.
Thank you for sharing. That topic came up in our group as we encountered stories of trauma that required huge amounts of love and forgiveness to overcome. So I'm really glad that you're that is part of the strategy for moving forward. So we're just trying to harvest ideas that came up in your conversation, things you said or things somebody in your room said that were intriguing or important or useful to you. Who's next?
Somebody jump in or I will keep talking. I have so much to say to y'all. I'm so happy to be here.
Kate, I see that you're trying to say something, but unmute yourself, please.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask my colleagues, Ava and Lisa, if you wanted to say something about the microaggressions and standing up to those sorts of things, you know, in terms of transferring from the terror to the triumph. I don't know where you two went. Oh, there you are. Well, Ava, you were the one, I think, who said that, like, standing in a grocery line and a person out of, I think in a neutral sense of the word, I guess, out of ignorance, feels like they can touch you or something like that. And the difference between saying, excuse me and excuse you, but speaking to it, right? Go ahead, Ava.
About microaggressions in general and how we handle them. Because as Black women, Lisa, and what's the other?
We can't hear you.
Okay. So just speaking about microaggressions in general and whether you address them at the time or let them slide is a matter of really being emotionally intelligent to make sure that you can read the other person to determine if it's safe to do so or not. And I was just speaking to the fact that I use those cues to determine whether I will address something, because I have gotten much more assertive as an adult than I was as a child. And I don't want things to slide if I think that there is an opportunity to address it. And so instead of saying, excuse me, when someone creates a microaggression towards me, I say, excuse you, so that they understand it's them that is committing the microaggression, that I am not accusing myself for something that they did. And it seems to work better for them to realize the situation than if I were to say, excuse me, and then they can just pass it off as, oh, she was in my way, or et cetera, et cetera. So just using that was just one tactic of how to address a microaggression and not let things slide, and kind of retrain people to the idea that they might have that I'm invisible and that they are entitled to move in front of me, to touch my hair, to make a comment of any sort that's inappropriate regarding my body or whatever the case may be.
Powerful story of reframing through a simple tweak of language. Ava, thanks for sharing. We have just 1 minute, Janine, and so I'm going to have you, I guess, give us the last word, although we could clearly go for another hour at least. Take us out with some words of synthesis in your conclusion, please.
Okay. 30 seconds. So Ava, thank you so much for offering that. One of the things that I also want to offer is the visualization of a higher healing. So one of the things that we have like at issue that we get, like a problem that we get to solve, is that we're so low on our understanding of racial literacy or racial injury and gender injury and understanding white supremacy and how it functions, that our reach for our standard for engagement and for encounter and sort of crafting encounter is also low. And we can actually craft a higher healing whereby we're able to engage with one another in exterior life that actually forges like a different level of breakthrough, as opposed to forming a defiance or a defense or an affront. It becomes competition. Like, who can be the most savvy or the smartest or the quickest or the wittiest, etc. And so what I would say is, let me know how I can serve you later, because I'd love to talk to you also about the ways that I've talked to women and coached women around how to make decisions. Because what you're talking about, Ava, is decisions. There are a whole suite of decisions that Black and brown women in schools and society have to make all the time. Decisions about how to move, how to dress, what to say, what not to say, when to hold back, when to move in, you know, and ways to connect or ways to displace, etc. And those decisions actually afford a really powerful interior life that, again, the average white woman doesn't have, the average white man absolutely does not have. And so making decisions, calling in spiritual wisdom, thinking through imperial logics can actually create a space for a higher healing where you can actually craft interactions, relationships, engagements, even curriculum with people, for people, in the service of people, that actually results in a more egalitarian, connected, empowered set of boundaries and regulations for the crafting of your daily experience. There's a better way. And so I hope to stay in touch and to offer more service to this community. You all seem like a great collection of colleagues, and I'm so grateful for the invitation. Thank you, Renee. And thank you for spending your time with me.
Wow. So let's give Janine a big round of applause. Janine, thank you so very much for participating. I just want everybody to have access to your website. So I'm going to put that up on the screen here as we go out. Do check out Janine's website at janinestaples.com. Janine, thanks for giving us a lot to chew on and think about. And of course, we're going to have another Virus of Racism seminar in just a couple more weeks. So thanks for joining us this time, and I hope to see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Renee. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. It was very inspiring.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. Bye-bye, guys. See you next time.
Okay, bye. Looking